say we're very happy you're with us today. We're going to talk a little bit about the crucifixion today. This is supposed to be an Easter sermon, but everybody left last week, so we're having an Easter sermon today. But this to me is very important. The song Roger sung goes hand in glove with what I've got to say today. Passion Week, something we discussed last week. It's what people have named the week between Palm Sunday and Easter Sunday. It's a man-made thing. It's of human origin. But we discussed the first part of Passion Week last Sunday. Have a little trouble getting my breath. Excuse me. Today I'd like to continue on. But first we got to set the stage. We left off last week on Tuesday, if you recall. I didn't have time to get into the things that took place that evening after sundown. But on Tuesday after sundown, after the Lord and his disciples returned to Bethany, we got Jesus make certain predictions. The rulers make a plot against Jesus, and Judas bargains to betray Christ on Tuesday night. All this was going on. What happened this particular night, or in the evening actually, Jesus exposed the hypocrisy of the scribes, the Pharisees, and the hypocrites. 7 times he referred to them that way in his final discourse in the temple. And he also told them that Jerusalem was going to be destroyed in their generation, as a matter of fact, which it was. We know that 40 years later, the Roman legions came into Judea, Jerusalem, and they did destroy the city just like he said they would. But anyway, when he said that the temple would be destroyed, the city would be destroyed, the Jewish hierarchy would be destroyed, they were furious. They were absolutely furious with the Lord. And the religious leaders, they determined that they were going to take his life. They had to take his life, they thought. In Luke 22:2, the chief priests and the scribes sought how they might kill him, but they feared the people, and they couldn't just do it out in the public. So they had to come up with another way. Well, lo and behold, who shows up at their door? Judas Iscariot, one of the apostles. And Judas, for 30 pieces of silver, offers to lead the temple guard out to where Jesus would be. He knew where he would be. And then they would be able to arrest him when no one was around and make the story however they wanted to make it. So this is what festered everything and brought it to a head. Well, next we want to move on to Thursday. It's Thursday evening. It's after 6, probably between 6 and 7:30, I would suppose. The disciples and the Lord, they all went back to Jerusalem in order to keep the Passover. There was an upper room that they were able to use, and they got together there and they would eat the Passover at the proper time, as was according to the law of Moses. In John chapter 13, we read about them eating the Passover meal. This happened first. Secondly, we read about Jesus washing his disciples' feet. They were all wanting to be more important than they were. And the Lord tried to teach them that they had to be humble. So he got down on his knees and he washed their dirty, nasty feet, one by one, and shamed them to death. His point was, if I, your Lord, would bend over to wash your feet, you ought to be willing to wash one another's feet. You ought to be humble. Instead of thinking you should be served, You should think more like a servant. This is something he tried to get in their heads and never did. Not while he was alive. After he was raised from the dead, these things started coming back, and they meant something to him then. It meant more because he is the real deal. He was raised from the dead like he said he would be. And they started listening to what he said more clearly. Judas, about this time, Judas left the assembly. He had an itch. He wanted to make some money. He knew the Lord made the scribes and the Pharisees angry. So he asked to go take care of business. And the Lord gave him leave to go ahead and do what he had to do. And Judas went over to the temple to make a deal with temple leaders. Peter was boasting, as Peter was wont to do, that he would never leave Jesus aside no matter what. And Jesus told him something that just rattled him to the core. He said, before tonight is over, you're going to deny me 3 times by the time the cock crows twice. Oh, Peter, no, that's not going to happen. There was a lot of activity going to take place Thursday night, at least according to what is stacked up for us, according to John. The Lord's Supper was something they partook of after they had eaten the Passover meal. Now, get it in your mind what it was like. They had eaten the Passover meal. They had a little place set up where they got together and they ate the meal according to the law of Moses. So when they got done eating the meal, what was the meal? Well, the meal was bread, unleavened bread, and it was the fruit of the vine, the wine, or grape juice, if you will. This is what they used during the Passover meal. So here they are. The Lord's going to institute the Lord's Supper. And what does he use? He uses what's sitting there. He uses the bread, and he uses the fruit of the vine. Why do I say that? Sometimes people say, well, why does it have to be unleavened bread? Well, because that's what Jesus used when he instituted the Lord's Supper. He used unleavened bread. How do you know it was unleavened bread? Because according to the law of Moses, it had to be unleavened bread in the Passover. There couldn't be leaven in anything. So it had to be unleavened bread. So this is what they ate when Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper. One other thing you want to keep in mind also. At the time that Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper, there was only 11 apostles. Remember, Judas had already left. So Judas wasn't involved in these other activities, which I think is fitting given the situation as it was. There was a farewell discourse that Jesus taught, recorded in John chapter 14, 15, and 16. And then when you get to John chapter 17, we have what is really the Lord's Prayer. Sometimes people allude to Matthew chapter 7 as the Lord's Prayer. That's not the Lord's Prayer. That's what you would call a model prayer. The disciples said, Lord, teach us to pray. And that's what Jesus did. Pray this way. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And he went on to teach them a model that they could follow. But this prayer in John 17 takes up the chapter. This is actually the Lord's Prayer. This is Jesus Christ speaking to his Father. And he opens his heart for us. We see him in a very intimate light with God the Father. And we can see how he speaks, what was important to him, the preciousness of the moment. But this would be referred to as the Lord's Prayer. Then they went to Gethsemane. Apparently this was something the Lord did frequently. This is where Judas Iscariot knew Jesus would go. Apparently he went there all the time. And Judas knew that he would be at this place. But while he was in Gethsemane, he's between the Mount of Olives and the Kidron Brook. When you go down the hill from the Mount of Olives, and you go across this little valley, and there's the Garden of Gethsemane right there. You go a little farther, and you cross the brook Kidron, and then you go just a wee bit farther, and you go back up the hill to Jerusalem. And when you go in the city of Jerusalem, right there's the temple. I mean, it's actually really close to one another. It's a brief walk, 30-minute walk or so, if you made it all in one lick. But it doesn't take long at all to make the journey. I timed it, but I can't remember what I timed it anymore when I walked that course. Anyway, the Lord had an agonizing prayer. He was going to be scourged and crucified. He knew what was going to happen. He'd seen it from eternity. And he dreaded it. He dreaded it. He prayed to the Father, if there's another way, if there's any other way besides this, that would be good. But not my will, but your will be done. We're told that his sweat became like drops of blood. His prayer was so intense, his pain was so incredible that he prayed and he prayed and he prayed that God would find another way for him to atone for our sins. But there was no other way. It had to be this way or not at all. And so he went through it because he loves us. And what happened to him was awful. So awful. Several hours before dawn, Jesus is betrayed, arrested, and forsaken by his disciples. Judas Iscariot brought the temple guard, and he identified the Lord by giving him a kiss on the cheek. The kiss on the cheek was akin to us today. We might hug one another, shake hands, whatever. It's a form of greeting. And the kiss on the cheek was a form of greeting at that time. And Judas came up and he kissed Jesus. He told the guard, whoever I kiss, that'll be him. So they knew who Jesus was, and they seized him and they arrested him there in the Garden of Gethsemane. Cat was out of the bag. Everybody knew what Judas had done. They went back to Jerusalem with the Lord. They climbed that little hill, and they went to the palace of a high priest named Annas. Annas was high priest to the Jews. He was the person who was supposed to be the high priest according to their system of governance. But the Romans didn't recognize Annas, but the Jews did. So when they arrested the Lord, first place they took him was to Annas, to let Annas examine him, to find out whatever flaws he could find out about him. And this is what Annas attempted to do. But he couldn't find any fault in Jesus. He tried. They slapped him around. They beat on him a bit. And there was nothing he could charge him with. So Annas said, send him on to Caiaphas. Caiaphas was the high priest that had been appointed by the Romans. They didn't want to fool with Annas. Probably, he wasn't a good politician. But his son-in-law, Caiaphas, he's the guy to talk to, because they could make deals with Caiaphas. So they took Jesus after that to Caiaphas's palace, and there is a second stage of the Jewish examination, Jesus before Caiaphas. And Caiaphas examines the Lord just like Annas did. Caiaphas they've already decided they're going to murder him. They just got to find a way to do it legally. So what they do is they bring in people who will lie about Jesus. They come in and they accuse him of blasphemy, which is the penalty would be death. They accused him of blasphemy. They got a few witnesses to say he had blasphemed, and they believed they had enough where they could have him crucified by the Roman governor. About this time, Peter was outside of Caiaphas' palace, and Peter had already denied Jesus twice. Somebody said, "Weren't you with that Nazarene?" No, I don't know that man. And now, about the same time as Jesus is speaking to Caiaphas, Peter's outside, and a third time, he's asked, "Weren't you with that Nazarene?" No, I don't know that man. He began cursing and carrying on, and the cock crowed 2 times. Well, about the same time as all this was happening, Jesus was being led from Caiaphas' palace over to where the Sanhedrin would gather together. And when he came out of the building, lo and behold, who was standing there? It was Peter. And Peter was denying him, and their eyes met. And Peter remembered that Jesus said, "Before the cock crows twice, you'll deny me 3 times. And sure enough, it came to pass. And that brings us to the third stage of the Jewish examination, and that is with the Sanhedrin. Early morning, before dawn, they gathered the Jewish leaders together, the 70 members in the Sanhedrin. They didn't gather all 70 of them. Some of these people believed in Jesus, so they didn't get them out of bed. They didn't get Nicodemus, for example. Joseph of Arimathea, if you recall, these men thought highly of Jesus. So they didn't bother assembling all of the Sanhedrin. They just assembled the ones that they wanted to be present. They knew they would go along with their plan. Well, the assembly was actually illegal. Number one, they're not supposed to meet in the dark. That was contrary to the law of Moses. Number two, they weren't supposed to hand down edicts with a partial assembly. Everybody was supposed to have been present. So everything they're doing here is illegal. They have no regard for God's law. They don't care if they're sinning against God or not. They want Jesus crucified, and they're going to get him crucified one way or the other. And if they have to do it underhandedly, that's exactly what they're going to do, and that's exactly what they did. Then Jesus is going to be examined by the Gentiles. The Jews can't do anything to him. They don't have the power to take a man's life. So they got to get the Romans on their side. So the Jewish authorities, they get together and they take Jesus over to meet with Pontius Pilate, the governor of Judea. The first stage of the Roman trial was Jesus standing before Pilate the first time. It was, frankly, it was an open discussion. And Pilate knew the Jews. He knew they were envious of the Lord. He knew that they were evil men that would do anything for $1. He understood their character. And then he looked at Jesus and he can't see anything wrong with him. He doesn't know what the fuss is all about. He's a harmless man. Why do they want to kill him? Except for the fact that they're envious of him. To go to the second stage, Pontius Pilate doesn't want to touch Jesus. So he says, hey, Herod's in town. I want to send Jesus over to Herod. Herod's over Galilee. Jesus is from Galilee. I'm going to send Jesus over and let Herod do something with him. I don't want to convict him of a crime. He hasn't committed a crime. So he sent him over to Herod Antipas. Herod examined Jesus. He tries to get him to do some, he thinks it's magic. He's wanting him to perform some miracles. where he could be entertained by his abilities, his talents, and of course the Lord wouldn't do it. And then finally Herod decided, I'm tired of you, and he simply just sent Jesus back to Pontius Pilate, and he had nothing to say about Jesus as far as a crime or a criminal. That brings us to the third stage of the Roman trial. There's 3 Jewish examinations, 3 Roman examinations. He was up all night being tried by these characters. In the third stage of the Roman trial, or examination really, Pontius Pilate is trying to find a way to get Jesus off of death row. The Jews have a custom where during this Passover season, they can ask for someone to be set at liberty who's in prison. And Pilate, he's got the 2 men. He's got a guy named Barabbas who is meaner than all get out. Everybody's terrified by him because he's a monster. And then he's got this harmless Nazarene on the other hand. So he comes up with an idea. If I give them a choice between Barabbas and Jesus, they're going to want Jesus because nobody wants to turn Barabbas loose. He's going to start hurting people again. Well, it didn't go that way. The rulers of the Jews, they went around, stirred up the people, and they got the people to holler out, Barabbas, give us Barabbas. And Pilate tried and tried and tried to set Jesus free. He came up with another idea. He's going to have him beaten. Scourged is what they called it. He's going to have Jesus beaten. And he's going to have him beaten severely. Because he probably thought when the people see him after the soldiers get done with him, they'll cry because of his pitiful presence. So Pilate sent the Lord to be scourged, and he did. Pilate said to them, do you want me to release to you Barabbas or Jesus called Christ? He knew they had handed him over just because of envy, which was true. Pilate had him figured out. They sent Jesus out, and he was beaten. He was beaten with a whip. The whip is an ugly little thing. It's a stick, and then it's got leather straps on the end of it. I had a picture of one, but I didn't bring it. These leather straps, there's about 9 or 12 of them, and in the ends of the straps, they put bits of metal, like a metal that was bent, like maybe a U shape or L shape, and they would fasten these bits of metal or pieces of glass. They would fasten them to the leather thongs, and then they would take that whip, and they would tie a person to the post, and they would beat them. There were different kinds of posts. Some posts were tall, and your hands would be tied up over your head. Some were short, like the one in this picture. I don't know which kind of post Jesus was tied to. I do know, however, that he was beaten mercilessly with this whip. If you could imagine these leather thongs going around his body, landing on his flesh, and then pulling it back, and that metal would dig into his flesh and would tear him all the way around. He got hung in the mouth, and you pull that whip back, and it rips his cheek wide open. Pilate's aim was to present Jesus to the multitude in such a pitiful condition that they would say, release him, he's had enough. He's gone through more than any man should have to go through. Don't kill him, but take him right up to the edge of death. And they beat him, and they beat him, and they beat him. That's probably why our Lord died so fast. He was only on the cross for 6 hours and he died. It wasn't uncommon when people had gone through this punishment. They might hang on the cross for 2, 3, 4 days and not die. Jesus died in 6 hours. I think it indicates how badly he was beaten during the scourging. His flesh would be like raw hamburger meat. Then they planted a crown of thorns, and they fastened this crown to his head. And they would take bamboo shoots, and they would push the thorns up under his skin. The thorns are about yay long. And they would push those thorns up under his skin all the way around his head and fasten that crown to his head in order to make his suffering more indignant. A king with his crown and his purple robe standing there, a pitiful sight to behold. And then when they had done what they could do, Pilate brought the Lord back out. He stood the Son of God up before the multitudes, and he said, "Behold, your king! We have no king but Caesar. Shall I crucify your king?" And they hollered back, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" And Pilate had nowhere to turn. He had nowhere to go. If he didn't do something with this Jesus, the Jews had already said that they were going to go to Caesar and tell Caesar that Pilate's not governing properly. And then Pilate would be in trouble with Caesar. What does he do? Does he keep his job? Is he going to be exiled to an island somewhere? He's going to have to make a decision. It's either going to be Jesus or his own safety. And he chose his own safety. In spite of the warnings he got from his wife, in spite of his own fears of putting this innocent man to death, he allowed the Lord to be crucified. Jesus had to carry his cross through the streets of Jerusalem. He couldn't under the weight. So they compelled Simon, a Cyrenian man, who helped him carry his cross up to Golgotha. Then at Golgotha they would lay him down and they would nail him to the cross. Whether it was a T cross like that or whether it was just a cross beam, it could have been either way. They did it both ways. I don't know which way they did the Lord. But what I do know is when they crucified him, they would have laid him down on the crossbeam, and they would have put nails right about here in the wrist. And you say, well, the Bible says his hand. Well, back then, the hand was considered this portion of the wrist and the hand. They didn't have the wrist and hand, they had the hand. The whole thing was a hand. And they would nail the nail back here in the wrist. And there's a reason for that. If you nailed a nail right there in the palm of his hand, he would have all his body weight on these two nails. And if you put all your body weight on two nails right there, it's just going to tear through the skin. You're going to fall down to the ground. You're not going to be able to nail somebody in the palms of their hand and hold them up on a cross. They would have to nail them down here where the bone in the wrist would hold them so that they wouldn't fall down. And that's where he was nailed at. This picture shows him being nailed in the palm of his hand, but that's not correct. The ones I've seen that were crucified, that they nailed them in the wrists. And the ones that they found, archaeologists have found in caves and stuff where they were buried, the nail was through the wrist and through the ankle and the foot. A horrible, horrible thing they had to go through. And then the Lord would be lifted up on the cross at 9 a.m. He was hung there between two thieves. He was hanged up at 9 a.m. Uh, at noon, everything turned dark. People saw it as a sign from God that he was not happy, which was true, that he had turned his back on the sordid situation. Jesus' mama had to watch. She watched her baby as they crucified him. And I don't know what she went through, but it would have been horrible. And at 3 o'clock, the Lord died. He breathed his last, and they took him down off the cross. His friends, his family, his associates, they cleaned up his body. They took him to a sepulcher owned by Joseph of Arimathea. Supposedly, I was shown that particular sepulcher. I don't know what it was. It might have been, I don't know. It was just like this picture, because this picture is that sepulcher. Whether it was the one Jesus was buried in or not, you know, they're making money over there. So I don't know what was true. Guy Woods said the only thing you could really depend on was Jacob's well. He said the rest of it was all manufactured. I don't know. Anyway, they would have taken Jesus into a cave, something like this, a burial spot. They would have put him in that particular burial spot. They had his body cleaned up. They would have had white garments on him. They would have had incense and all the stuff they do for their burials, the way the Jews do it. Then they would come out, and that big stone there, they would roll that stone in front of that opening so that no one could come in or out. All this happened before 6 p.m. because it had to be done before 6 p.m. because that's the beginning of Sabbath. And this had to be finished before the Sabbath occurred. So this was the end of the Jewish religious leaders' problem with Jesus, the Son of God. They were victorious. The apostles were scattered. They were heartbroken. They had surrendered, they'd given up everything to follow him. Some say they were following him for 3 years. I don't think it was 3 years. I'm guessing 1.5 to 2 years maybe. It's hard to tell, to be honest with you. But they did leave their homes. They gave up their careers. Some of them had businesses, fishing businesses. They forsook everything, and they followed Jesus during the course of his ministry. And now he's dead. They had dreams of his kingdom. They were going to be affluent members in his kingdom. They would be on his right and his left hand. But they don't have anything anymore because he's dead. They had hoped he was the Son of God, but he's dead. You can't kill God. He must not have been the Son of God. They had hopes and dreams, and they all went up in smoke. None of it was true because he's dead. Saturday had to be the longest day of their life. What would they do now? And then came Sunday. On the third day, just like he said he would, Jesus was raised from the dead. The stone was rolled back. It didn't have to be rolled back, but it was rolled back. He could have come through the stone. But it was rolled back to make a point, and that is that the tomb was found empty. And then Jesus spent 40 days. He presented himself alive after his suffering by many infallible proofs, proofs that couldn't be denied, proofs that couldn't be proven not true. They are infallible proofs. Being seen by the apostles and others, actually over 500 people, for 40 days, and they witnessed his resurrection. They had lost their hope. They had lost their everything. They had some serious doubts about their belief. And now on Sunday, Jesus appears to them that evening, Sunday evening. He appears to 10 of his apostles, and he shows himself alive. He's got the nail prints in his wrists and in his feet. He told Thomas, if you need proof, you can stick your finger in it, and you can see that I'm he. And the hope that they had lost, they had regained. You'll read in Peter's writings that he begot us again. This is what Peter's alluding to. That Sunday, they had been born again, and then they lost their faith. And then on Sunday, they were born again. And the faith they had lost had been rekindled. And now they knew, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Jesus was who he claimed to be. It's been said that the resurrection is one of the best established and provable events ever to occur in history. There is so much evidence that teaches us that the Christ was raised on the third day, just like he said he would be. You know, the best evidence of all, I think, was that Peter and the other apostles preached on the day of Pentecost. And they preached that Christ was raised from the dead. If he hadn't been raised from the dead, all the governing authorities had to do was to go back to the sepulcher and go inside, retrieve his body, and prove that he was still in his grave. But they couldn't do that. Why? Because he wasn't there. Jewish historians who wrote about the event, who lived during that time, or shortly after, they were stunned by this particular thing. Why didn't they present his dead body? They had charge of it. They were guarding it. Nobody could get to his body unless they come through their soldiers. And their soldiers were there guarding it all the time. Where was the body? That's a question no one can answer. That's a question that people died over. We know where it was. He lives. He's the first of many who will follow his trail. He's referred to as the captain of our salvation. The word captain means trailblazer. And from Greek to English, it'd be a trailblazer. He blazed a trail for us. He came forth from the grave, and we will come forth from the grave just like he did. He was the first fruits, the first of many who will follow his trail and be raised from the dead to eternal life. Christianity, the entire religion, hangs on the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Unlike other religions, most of them are philosophical. The Christian religion is historical. The Christian religion is built, it's established on historical facts. Facts that can be established, facts that can be proven. If a person will just take the time to examine the evidence. The more I study these things, the stronger my faith becomes. And so will yours. If you continue to study these things. There's just too many questions that can't be answered. Oh, man, I want to say some stuff, but I got to quit. I'm getting way too long. So I'm going to hush.